Thank you very much, and thank you, Gavin and Ilta, for inviting me to talk. I'll probably start by saying that I'm a bit of a slow learner, and it took me a long time to learn that higher education is just incredibly complex, and I don't believe anyone really understands it. I don't understand it. We're just all poking around in the area that we're working in. So with that in mind, I'm going to tell you how it should be. But I'll also be saying to you that you need to be skeptical. So, and in a way, there's two parts to this talk. One is, I'm talking about new models of higher education. But the other thing is, we need to challenge all our assumptions. So, it seems that it's the thing to do when you make a presentation that you must have a quote because it shows that you're a learned, well-read person. If you have a quote. But the great thing about the internet is you could just search for them and you don't have to be well-read. So I got one here from Albert Einstein. Now, actually, it seems that he says he really does actually have a lot of quotes. There's a lot attributed to him. So in the spirit of skepticism, I had to do a bit more research. I just can't plagiarize from the internet. So I was wondering where that challenge everything came from. And it seems it came from EA Games. So that must be where I heard it when the kids were turning on the games or something like that. So this is as I say, let's have a look at some of our assumptions and challenge them. And I'm sure there's tons of them. And these are just the ones that have occurred to me. Okay, so here's some questions, some things, that we need to question. So I have a whole list of them here, just a list on a page. Does education have to be this expensive? Okay, does our quality assurance really work? Do we need lectures? Do students have to go to college at all? Can students learn self-efficacy? Do we have to spoon feed them? Is this an assumption we have? Do we need labs? I come from a STEM background, as Gavin was saying. Okay, I've just put a few of these in italics because I'm not going to address them. I'm not going to talk about it, so it'll take us a few seconds. I've been working recently, and COVID was really drove up. We've been trying to do distance learning in engineering, and we want to reduce the amount of labs. But as soon as COVID came, we had to really look at that even more closely. And I have to say that I began to question why we were even having a lot of the labs. We just seem to, you have to do it in STEM. I'm not so sure that's true. Where did this 40% come from? Anyone know? Why is a degree 4 years long? Do we need degrees? Okay. Now, a lot of these questions you might think are pretty obvious, but our institutions do seem to be founded on these assumptions. If you do question these, you do get a lot of raised eyebrows. Does research activity really help teaching? Just take a few seconds on that one. I'm not going to talk about it later. There does seem to be an assumption in higher education that you should be involved in research and teaching. And yet the research says that there's a slight negative correlation between research activity and teaching quality. And I would say there's another issue in learning technology. I often say to people, would you let a research engineer, would you put them in charge of a manufacturing facility? No, you won't. You separate those two functions. And yet, in EdTech and in teaching and learning, generally that part of what we do, which is our operations, a big part of our operations, is driven by people who are interested in research. Is that how it should be? Should there be Chinese walls there? I won't mention that again. Is higher education just really a sorting mechanism for employers? Is it a cheap way for them to figure out who to hire? And does it actually add value? Do we need this leaving cert? It's absolutely savage getting into higher education in this country. Should it be like that? Okay. Do subsidies stifle innovation? Now, I'm sure you have lots of other questions as well, but these are the sort of questions that have occurred to me during my work. Okay, why should we be looking at this? Why should we be thinking about this? Well, often strategically we use this SWOT analysis, okay? So I'll just, not to go into a lot of details on this, let's just look at some of the threats that are out there. The demographics isn't too bad in this country. It is worse in other areas in the developed world, in other countries in the developed world. But it's not with us either, okay? There will be, we've got a very high participation in higher education. It's certainly not going to get higher and it could get lower, okay? Economics, I think, might be a bigger problem. Like, we have enough debt in the country and COVID didn't help at all. So I suspect that there's a lot of people talking about we need more money in higher education. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. There are other priorities, particularly as you have outlaws like me retiring, and I'm hoping that those of you still working will keep me in a good health system and a good pension. So I'm not be spending it on young people's education. Okay, so we need to watch that. Higher education at scale coming in and competing. There was, Paul did mention something about postgraduate education. I think postgraduate education is going to just completely change in the next 10 years. Because you can see these postgraduate courses at scale, low cost, coming at us. Okay, so there'll be fierce competition on that. And competition to degrees, okay? Okay, does higher education have to cost so much? Here we have a building in Cambridge, and very nice, and a corrugated iron building. Do we need fancy stuff for education? Does it have to cost so much? This is just what I want to look at here. If you think about the reasons we use technology, these are the three reasons that people tend to identify. To improve the quality of the learning experience for our students, to improve their access to it, and to reduce the cost. Now, but unfortunately, this is the way I've perceived it in higher education for the last 20 years. In fact, in 1997, I was made Education Technology Officer in Sligo and worked for 3 years trying to encourage people to use technology to improve the quality of the learning experience for students. It was a disaster. I gave up. I made no impression at all. It's good to see that things are happening now. And even before COVID, things were getting better, I have to say, gradually people. But I gave up that and I went into Access, and it was more about making courses more accessible in an online distance. So to some extent, I felt that's the way our emphasis was over the past 20 years. I think we need to be thinking like this as well, because remember, cost is an access issue. And this is back to the economics, that if we don't control every other industry is trying to control costs. We have to try and control it as well, because the money may not be there and people need an education. And even in Ireland, where it's relatively heavily subsidised, still students are finding it difficult to go to college because of the cost. And just on cost, a question there for you. What's the world's main source of free learning? I'm sure a lot of you have guessed it. Or YouTube, probably. Okay? Or maybe, well, Google, I suppose. And what happens when you search in Google is you find the videos on YouTube. So I'm sort of saying, can we exploit this sort of thing to... I know that, by the way, I was a slow learner. My kids were finding videos on YouTube before it copped on to me that if I wanted to find out something, just go look for a video on YouTube. They've been doing it all the time. My daughter once said to me, she was studying engineering, she says, if I can't understand a lecture, I'll just go to YouTube and I'll find an Indian professor that explains it better. Does quality assurance work? I have probably serious issues with quality assurance in higher education. And I was struck by this quote that I came across. Doing the right thing is more important than doing things right. I think we are very heavily focused on pursuing excellence and doing it right. When if you're doing the wrong thing in the right way, it's not going to get you there. Is the evidence there that the quality assurance systems we do work? To some extent, I often feel that our quality assurance, and this is one thing our first online course was in manufacturing quality management back in 2002. And I began to talk a lot to quality people in manufacturing. And quality assurance in higher education is really so far removed from how quality assurance is done in the real world. Okay, does it real world? It's very deterministic. It says in order to get a quality course, you must do this, 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 and this, and then you will get a quality course. And yet most teachers just go into a room, close the door, and we have no control over it. And it's highly varied what comes out of there. And sometimes I think that, maybe my judgment is based on my experiences between 1974 and 1978. But to my comfort, my kids who just finished college said, no, it's not that different now either. You know, it's a bit better, but not that different. Highly varied. So real quality assurance comes from measuring the outputs, not the inputs. So you say, what is it you want to achieve, and measure it. And if you control the inputs, if you're highly specific about the inputs, you will inhibit innovation. So we need to properly change that. Then it begs the question, can we even measure our outputs? Are we any good at measuring learning? Like, I mean, there's a whole this idea in measurement is validity and reliability. Are we measuring the right thing? Is it authentic? And then can we consistently measure it with a consistent measurement? If you gave two versions of your exam to the same student, would they come out with the same mark? If two lecturers graded the one exam, would they come out with the same mark? If we got two lecturers to write the exam, would they come out the same? You know, those are the types of things. And our measurement is a bit dodgy, is it? But this, to some extent, is the question that I would ask, is because I suppose I did start teaching in a time when things were a bit fast and loose. But we had felt a certain responsibility to our students. We didn't have to prove to a quality assurance system that we were up to the mark, as it were. Just we had our own responsibility to students, and maybe it's slightly better now, but is it worth all the paperwork and overhead that we have to do to prove that we're... And there is this Pareto principle here, is that you can achieve 80% of the impact with 20% of your effort. Okay, once you start doing more than that, it just becomes a huge effort, and you may not get the, what does it say, diminishing returns. Okay, so we need to question this. And really, what I think it comes down to is a lack of trust of academics. I would be in favour of just throwing it to them and saying, do your best. You know, we trust you. We're not going to be measuring you all the time. And by the way, quality assurance in the real world would come from sampling. So from time to time, you will test just to make sure that you're generally okay. And again, in terms of quality management, and this comes a lot in with instructional design and content development and everything like that, YouTube proved that amateurs could produce very engaging content. And suddenly, was it the Hardy books was some YouTube video that just came out, and it was just succeeded without production values. It didn't have that. We need to sort of be able to distinguish between quality of ideas and content and production quality. And sometimes if we put it like this, ignore some of what would traditionally be regarded to be quality, we can do things a lot easier. I seem to be fond of YouTube. So is 40% really a pass? Does it indicate competence? Now, one of the things is, I suppose I do come from a STEM background, and we have huge problems, say, with mathematics, because students do mathematics, they get 38% from an exam where they had the choice of questions. So you haven't a clue that they really know much of it at all. And certainly they often don't know the things they need in other subjects. So sometimes I wonder which is better, knowing some content well. If we knew the students definitely did this, and we're in a medical school at the moment, to be honest with you, the medical people are the people that are the farthest ahead of this, because there are certain things that they have to do, and you know, people will die. So they are more focused on competence. But should that be a thing that we're doing elsewhere as well? We do say about differing abilities, and that's a big problem. I think that's one of the reasons why we have moved to this lower pass mark, because we don't want people failing all the time. But technology can help us there, because we can provide them with learning materials. They can take it, spend as much time as they need at it until they reach the standards that they have to get. But they will, to some extent, fall behind. So this idea of everybody going in lockstep maybe would have to go if we were moving towards a competency basis. And maybe it would take them more than 4 years, or maybe some students can move through it faster as well. And of course, this does beg the question, do we need lectures at all? If we got rid of lectures, which is always ironic that you're standing here in front of people and talking to say that. In other words, the lectures does assume everybody goes at the same pace, and to some extent I have to accept that some of you are sleeping out there, or, you know, and it will have different impact on different people. So maybe if we were to move to a competency basis, the lectures would have to go. A lot of people say, no, you can't move to competency. Some students don't have the self-efficacy for that. Maybe if we invested in developing their self-efficacy as soon as they enter college and prioritise that, maybe we'd have to spoon-feed them less. Maybe that would help us bring down costs. Do kids really need to go to college before? Now, I've talked about this before, and I'm sure some of you have heard me talk about this. Students can learn remotely. Like, I mean, there is a lot of complaint about this emergency remote education that we had during COVID. But to be honest with you, it wasn't as bad as maybe some people put out there. And the big problem might have been not so much that they couldn't learn online, but that they were stuck in their bedroom in a busy house or something like that. Maybe if their remote environment was better, it would work. So maybe if they were in jobs and working, like, I mean, we talk about the social need of college, but like there are other places to get social interaction as well. So we have to ask ourselves, what does campus really offer? And it's interesting, I've used that photo before, which is from the student prints. So even back in 1899 or whatever that was set, there was the idea that privileged people go to college and spend a lot of time drinking. That's the drinking song from the student prints. So that idea is certainly there. Is that a necessary part of this of the development of young people? Can we prove really that college adds something that can't be done in other ways? Okay, I'd seriously question that. And they may not even need degrees as well. Okay, there are alternative credentials out there. And maybe people can get jobs and develop personally in other ways. And I would say work-based training might be one of the ones, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes. So when we come to the concept of digital transformation, I think the phrase, and I think a lot of these phrases that are emerging have different meanings to different people, and there's no fixed meaning, but this is what it means to me, is like we've traditional teaching, we can digitize that, we can enhance the traditional teaching by using technology, but transformation is about new models, new ways of doing business, new ways of providing a service, and these new ways are ones that we couldn't do before because we just couldn't do them, and now technology allows us to do them. So I'll go quickly through what I would call my favourite innovations, and no doubt there are other ones as well, and my favourite innovations tend to be ones that give us new models of learning. So the higher apprenticeships, degree apprenticeships, I think this is a really good idea because I'm really keen on the idea that, I suppose it's true in STEM, but I believe it will be true in other areas as well, that people learn better while they're working, and working near people that are professionals in what they're studying. So I think this is a great idea. I put apprenticeships, by the way, in inverted commas because it's a legal term in Ireland, but there's lots of other ways to do work-based learning as well. So I think that's a great model, and I think it's one we need to be moving towards, and a lot of less people going to college and more people just out in the workplace working towards their degrees. Competency-based education, we talked about that, and in competency you define it by what you know and what you can do, and it should be agnostic on the learning experience. Too much of our quality is oriented, as I say, to saying this is how you will learn. We'll just say this is what you will achieve. Now, of course, that means that your assessment is crucial because we have to prove that they can do something or that they know something. Okay, we can use quizzes for knowledge. Okay, that's just to keep it cheap, and we can use other things as well, but we do probably need authentic assessment for skills. So assessment becomes more important and possibly more expensive and more thorough than it might have been before. But what it does do is it unleashes the potential for innovation. Because it's agnostic on the learning experience, we stop second guessing people on how the students learn and just say, let them learn, and let the facilitators, the teachers, experiment in whatever way they want. As long as they don't take advantage of them and give them a terrible learning experience and charge them big money. It's been known to happen. Recognition of prior learning. Now, this is not new, and I don't have a lot to say about it, and it's quite deep. And probably because I think it's not easy. We've been trying to do it for quite a while, and it's quite a challenge. But one of the things I would add to the RPL agenda is that simple challenge examinations may well be a cheap way to measure a lot of competency and allow us to bring down costs and to I suppose to bring down costs and bring down the effort in RPL. That might be one of the things. And I think this is one thing that we have to realize here, that we need to avoid excellence in RPL. Perfection just will cost too much. Okay, the flipped classroom. Again, the flipped classroom concept is not new. But technology allows... years ago, people were saying, read the chapter before class, and a quarter of the people read the chapter. Now we can say, read the chapter, there'll be a quiz, that quiz will be gone once class starts, and that will go towards your grade. So we have ways of checking that people are doing it. So it is much more viable now, and it's not a hugely radical new model, but it is a different way of doing campus learning. Hybrid teaching. Now, I said my favorite innovations. I'm not a huge fan of hybrid teaching, which means that trying to teach a class in front of you and remotely at the same time. Because to me, it's the most difficult, and generally one audience loses out. But I would say this for it, that if you're going, at least it's more inclusive. It allows more people access. To me, if somebody said, I'm going to teach a small class in college and there'll be some remote students too, I'd be saying, flip your classroom, maybe keep some, workshops separate, but don't have it all in this high flex mode. But hybrid teaching is, I like the fact that it allows more people access. Okay. This one from Sturt University, project-based degrees, 18 months on campus. They have no classes. They use this adaptive online content where they can keep track of them. The students just do the content online, and they work all day on projects. And then they go to 4 years in the workplace. I think this is a great model. As you can see, I'm not a big fan of lectures. As I said, it's more like a flipped program in a way. The whole program is flipped. They get the content online, and then they're doing stuff and building stuff during the day. So I think that's a great thing. And I just want to pay tribute to Munster Technological University, who've been very fast out of the traps on this. They have HCI funding on it, and they have the READY project, which is a project-based degree in engineering. And I think Michael Doctor is here, who's been working on that. And if anyone wants to talk to him about it, he'll tell you more. I'm just impressed at the speed they've got this going. Education at scale. I think it was 2013. They did this MOOC-style master's degree, and to me, this may signal the death knell of a lot of master's degrees. 11,000 people were enrolled in this when I looked at it, and it was $6,700, which is dirt cheap by American standards. Imagine what that's doing to master's degrees in the US. Okay, which are very expensive. By the way, I did meet some people about a week ago who told me there was 15,000 on that, and about 3 or 4 days ago they announced that price has come down to $4,800. So imagine if that emerges, what's that going to do to master's degrees? And that'll be the competition for us. I think it's a great thing. Now, that does require robust assessment, again, because to some extent it is throwing the responsibility of learning on the student. There's other education at scale, the University of the People, and you could say Khan Academy, even Alison from Galway that have 11 million learners online, is to some extent education at scale, and of course YouTube. Micro-credentials, Small, on-demand, up-to-date, cheap. How small should we be? I think we're already in a fight in the ATU on how small these are going to be. People just have this fixation on the 5 credit. What is this 5 credit thing? What's sacred about that? And then we'll say, okay, maybe 1 credit. What's wrong with half credit? I don't know. I think there could be any size. They have to be. I think it's very beneficial that they be stackable and that they be recognised. And recognition is difficult because it's not just an imprimatur of a college or a university. It's also, does that title, that content, so there is worldwide initiatives to try and agree on certain learning outcomes for key micro-credentials, but I still wouldn't like to see people lose their freedom to develop their own micro-credentials. And this is why registrars are very suspicious of this. It's going to be unbelievably messy. And again, this is where technology comes in, because we could have had the idea of micro-credentials in the past, and we have, but my God, looking at a CV, with 100 micro-credentials on it is just too much of a mess. But if the digital infrastructure is there that allows employers or even institutions to examine a messy bunch of micro-credentials, even measure them against outcomes or competencies for a job or something like that, and it was easy to do, these micro-credentials would be a lot more valuable and a lot more useful. So that digital credential infrastructure, if it's not there yet, will be important. In terms of micro-credentials, a lot of us have been funded to develop micro-credentials now under HCI and maybe embed these in bigger awards. But can I just ask this question? What if I designed a program and said, okay, this is a master's degree in such and such, and you know what? There's a great free course from edX here. We'll embed that in it. We won't even teach it. We don't even have an expert in-house in it. I don't know how that's going to fry the brain of some registrars. Are there any registrars here? So could we do that, And remember, and to some extent this is done. Straighter Line in the US run these sort of college courses very cheaply that students can take, and they have pre-agreed with a bunch of universities to accept these for college credits. So those universities probably teach the equivalent course in their college, but so what I'm sort of saying is, imagine if you didn't even do that, but you accepted these low-cost things. Okay, now, I might try to predict the future, and I've been singularly unsuccessful in predicting the future in the past, and that's, as Yogi Bear says, it's hard to make predictions, particularly about the future. There's lots of reasons why I could be wrong, but these are a couple of reasons why I think I could be wrong. For starters, if you try something new, suddenly you find that you're not entitled to the subsidies that people had before, so it's never going to fly. Okay, so we need to watch out for that. And I suppose to some extent we've done a bit of lobbying of the government for, say, we've had full-time online programs that aren't entitled to SUSI grants and things like this. So those are things that can hold us back. Industrial relations, of course. Now, I believe that technology can make things more efficient. So if there are efficiencies there, there's something in it for everybody. For the student, for the institution, and for the workers. There has to be something in there. So there has to be a way out there, but it can hold it back if we just people say no, no, no all the time. And this is the other thing, is that if you subscribe to this sort of signaling theory of higher education, that the employers don't care, really. They just want it to be difficult, because then they know that the people come through it are able to do something difficult. If we make it easier for students, then they say, no, we want the students that went through the difficult way. That could undermine innovation as well. So just to finish off, I've just 3 things. I think we're too focused on quality. There are others. Access and cost are important, okay? I think we need to think strategically, okay, about what are the new models that will serve people better. And it is about, strategically, is about choosing to do the right things and not getting too focused on how well we do them. Just let's do them and we'll get good at them eventually. I've often said to people, don't wait till you're good at something to do it and you might get good at it then. So if you want to get in touch with me, there's my personal email address, and I don't think we've time for it. Oh, bang on time. Thank you very much.